that's how we're marking these things off. So I want to start by just making this observation that first we looked at Jesus with the 144,000. We talked about where they are, that they're on Mount Zion, as the text says. And as you know, what I see, the way I'm interpreting this, there are a couple different views, but I'm placing that Mount Zion as a physical Mount Zion on earth. So timing-wise, that would place that first scene during the millennial kingdom. Now, in verse 6, John says, "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven." So imagine, if you will, he turns his head, he's looking at a different scene here. And he sees another angel flying. And we're about to see three of these angels, one right after the other, and they each have something to proclaim. So this clearly is a different, again, I'm saying scene. If anybody comes up with a different word, but hopefully you all get what I mean. Like, he's seeing a different vision. Remember, he sees a series of visions all throughout Revelation. He writes them down. So now he says, "Then I saw." So we've left this vision of Jesus with the 144,000. Now he's going to see three angels. So first he's looking at the first one. And this angel is flying in the midst of heaven, in the sky. Sister Carolyn. We're going to get the mic over. And that's where I'm going, is we got to look at time as well, right? Each one of these, from the clues in the text, they don't seem to be sequential necessarily.
Right, that was my question. I think we mentioned it before. These aren't necessarily happening one right after the other.
Yeah. And to that point, talking about them not happening one right after the other, that first scene, like I mentioned, I'm placing that timing-wise in the millennium. So it's not even happening, like, if you want to think of it this way, it doesn't happen right where we left off in chapter 13. Because in chapter 13, 12 and 13, clearly that's the midpoint of the tribulation. And we've derived that from the text itself. We have time markers in there, the 1,260 days, for example, 42 months. Then you hit chapter 14 and start with the Lamb and 144,000 on Mount Zion, on earth. And again, that is interpretation. You know, I wouldn't put the disclaimer out anymore, but I'm placing that scene itself as happening during the millennial reign of Christ. He's seeing ahead, and he's seeing these 144,000 victorious with Jesus, and we learn quite a bit about them. You know, why are they so honored, if you will? Now this scene, John says, "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth." From what I see, this can't follow sequentially. Jesus and 144,000 during the millennium, and then this angel, and again, he's going to see a series of three angels making proclamations. That can't happen after because if it were going sequentially, that would mean, okay, after the millennium, then these angels are making these proclamations. That doesn't fit. What do you all see? Do you agree with me? What do you see timing-wise? Where do we put this? Sister Sheila.
Okay, based on context clues, I see this scene that we're in now, the second scene, as being in the tribulation. And the marker, the time marker I see, is when it states that whoever takes the mark beast. So I think that we're in the second half of the tribulation, based on this time marker.
Does everybody see where Sister Sheila is looking? She said her time marker, what she sees there is the fact that the third angel, look at verse 9, then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God." and I'll stop there, the fact that this angel is giving a warning about taking the mark of the beast, this is placing us, it has to be during the tribulation period, first of all, right? It's got to be during the tribulation period, and I'd say, Sister Sheila, it looks to me that this is definitely in the second half of the tribulation, because when does this order to take the mark of the beast, when does it come? After the abomination of desolation. If you want to label it as chapters, chapter 13 was where we saw the mark of the beast, and we know that that's the midpoint of the tribulation, when the Antichrist is at the height of his power, and the false prophet gives, I mean, he has all the authority of the beast, right? So he is administering a lot. I mean, we can infer that from the text, but we're shown two specific things that the false prophet does in terms of his power and his administration. What does he do? He orders people to make an image of the beast and worship it, which he gives life to that image, by the way, so that it can cause someone to be killed. Whoever does not worship the image, that's one thing he does. The other thing the false prophet does is he gives this order, all people take this mark of the beast, right? And that happens, this is midpoint of the tribulation. Or if you want to just cut it into two halves, the second half of the tribulation is the time where people are taking the mark of the beast. So for this angel to go out and proclaim, if anyone worship the beast in his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God. Again, I'll stop there. For this image, for this angel to be proclaiming this has to be happening during, I'm going to say, the second half of the tribulation. I think we can zero in at least that much or focus in. It makes no sense to place this during the millennial kingdom, right? Right. So this has to be during the tribulation. So do you see, first we were looking at Jesus and the 144,000 on Mount Zion during the millennium. Now John looks and he's seeing a different vision, and this vision, I believe, clearly is occurring from the context here. This puts us back during the tribulation. So time-wise, the second vision actually goes back before the first vision that he saw of the Lamb and 144,000. So he is seeing these scenes. Each one of them has to be placed in its own context, or it has to be placed on the timeline. That's what I see here. Does anyone else see anything else in terms of just timing and placing things in a proper order? All right. So now let's keep going and let's look at these angels and what they're saying and what this all means. And again, we're focusing on verses 6 through 13 here. That seems to me to be the natural division here of this part of the vision. So again in verse 6, then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. I can't help it. Let's go to Galatians. Remember Paul, he writes to the Galatians because there is a perverted gospel being preached to them, or somebody has come in and is telling them something that sounds like the gospel. Paul's point is it's not the gospel. It's not correct what you're being told. And these are believers in these churches. Galatians is not a single church. There's a group of churches in an area. The area of Galatia. So he's writing a general letter to these churches in this area. Galatians chapter 1, verse 6. I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another. And we brought Galatians in before, as we've been studying Revelation, to talk about that word allos that's here. When Paul says a different gospel, which is not another, in verse 7, that not another is that Greek word allos, meaning it's not another of the same kind. So Paul is saying to them, someone, or you get it from the context, you realize this, somebody has come and somehow declared to them a gospel. And there, he says, you are turning away. So it appears they're being heavily influenced by this teaching. And Paul is writing to correct this. But he says, I marvel. He's amazed that they're even entertaining this. But his point is that it's a different gospel. And, you know, when I explain this, the way I understand this, when Paul says a different gospel, which is not another, is like if you ask, you know, maybe 10 of us here at Manna, hey, what's the gospel? And we all explain what the gospel is. Well, there's certain things that ought to be in there. Like we're different people. I'm sure we're not going to say the exact same words, most likely, right? But there ought to be the death, burial, resurrection, right? Jesus ought to be in there somewhere, you think? Right? Right. I'm sure we all would mention Jesus at a minimum. And we're going to explain what the gospel is in our own way, and maybe somebody kind of left something out, but somebody else filled that part in. There are certain fundamentals that would be in that gospel. Paul is saying you're turning away to a gospel which is different, but it's not another of the same kind. Like Pastor Ron explains it and Sister Carolyn explains it, but there's common elements there. So it's quote unquote different, two different people explaining it, but it's the same kind of gospel. It's the same thing. Even in the Bible, you go through the New Testament and we see different points where the gospel is preached. Is it said the exact same way every time? No, it's not. But is it the same kind of gospel? It's the same. Paul is saying you're turning away to something else, which is different. And we're going to see in a moment, Paul says something about angels here. Pastor Ron.
Yeah, I just had observation and question. It says in Revelation 14:6, it says it's an everlasting gospel. And in my mind, when we're in the church age, the everlasting gospel is it's the same as the gospel of grace. In this dispensation, and also I just noticed the angels. Where sometimes you read too fast, you pass over these angels, and I think it's intuitive they can fly. These angels have supernatural abilities. That's the attributes of angels. But they claim the everlasting gospel, and it's to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. And in today's dispensation, we have to do translation. The angels were, I don't know how well, but every nation, tribe, tongue, and people could understand it.
So, Pastor Ron, I'm glad you brought those things out. Let's work through, and because that naturally takes us through the text, I believe, as well. So, yeah, let's get into that. First, let's finish. I want to finish looking what Paul is saying here in Galatians, and then let's work through that. Let's work through the characteristics of this gospel, because that's where the text naturally takes us, I believe. So we're going to go right down the line with what Pastor Ron just asked and observed. Look at what Paul says here in Galatians chapter 1. I'm going to pick up at verse 7. He says, which is not another, okay, to a different gospel, which is not another, that there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. And here it is. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. And, you know, here at Manna, we've looked at this verse many times, but if there's anybody that's not familiar with this, when Paul says let him be accursed, I mean, he's saying, plainly speaking, he can go to hell. That is what he's saying. And we know hell is a holding place. Paul says accursed, so that means the lake of fire. That means eternal torment. If anybody preaches another gospel, which is perverted, which is not the true gospel of Jesus Christ, let him be wind up in the lake of fire. Let him be accursed. Let him be damned, condemned for all eternity. Paul is not mincing words here. And personally, I don't believe Paul is not using some hyperbole, right? This is Paul the apostle, and of course, this is God's word. This is what God says. So I don't see this as, well, that's just some hyperbole. Paul is just saying, hey, the gospel is really, really important. No, Paul is saying, somebody who comes and brings a perverted gospel, let him be accursed. Let him be condemned to the second death. That's where you're going to wind up. So this is serious business. So I'm bringing this out because Paul makes a strong statement about the gospel. And Pastor Ron, to your point, in looking at the text, it does stand out to me. Did it or does it jump out to you all where you see this word everlasting gospel? That's called the everlasting gospel. Because it does naturally make you wonder, well, okay, hold on. So what the angel is claiming, is it a different gospel, so to speak? Because as we've seen going through Revelation, you probably guessed it, there are different views on this. There are some Christians, some teachers, just Christian folks that will read this and say, this is called the everlasting gospel. That's different. I've never seen the gospel talked about like that before. Plus, you got angels declaring this gospel. This is different here. I wonder, is this something different that is in this gospel? And some will take it to the next step and say, well, maybe there's a different way, since this is during the tribulation period that this is being preached. Maybe there's a different way that these folks during the tribulation, at this point in the tribulation, maybe the way they get saved is different or something. And that's a view. I'm not saying that that's what I'm teaching. But that's, to Pastor Ron's question, let's look at that. Paul says if somebody brings a different gospel that's not the gospel, right? Again, allowing for the fact that different people will say it different ways, but if it doesn't have the fundamentals of the faith, if it's not the correct gospel, if it is a perverted gospel, even if it's an angel from heaven, that man that comes and brings a perverted gospel, let him be accursed. So now here we actually have an angel from heaven flying around declaring the everlasting gospel to all the people on the earth. Is this different in some way, this everlasting gospel? Textually, what do you see in the context? Is this gospel different? Is it somehow, again, a different kind of, different substance? Look at what the angel says. It's called the everlasting gospel. Verse 7, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and springs of water. Is the gospel different during the tribulation period? Pastor Ron had his hand up, and then we're going to go. Sister Sheila said no first, and then Sister Kat. Pastor Ron.
So it starts off, it says, quotes, it says, fear God and give glory to him. Not mentioning the death, burial, resurrection, but it says, fear God, give him glory to him. For the hour of his judgment has come, and then worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and springs of water. So it seems like it's different than the gospel as we know it in the church age. Seems like it's different.
Seems like it's different.
Yeah.
Different, but different how? Different in substance as far as what the gospel is all about, or just the way that it's being expressed? The terminology. Okay, so Pastor Ron is bringing out that seems the terminology is different, but you're not saying that it seems like the substance of what the gospel, can I say, has been up until this point. The substance is not changing.
Yeah, because we're saved to worship God.
Okay, all right. Sister Sheila.
I'm going back to Galatians 8 and 9.
All right, Galatians.
Galatians 1, 8.
Yeah, I was going to say in chapter
9,
1.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
8 and 9.
Yeah, I'm looking at this strong warning that Paul is giving here, and I can't find what I want, but based on these two verses, it's so serious that the true gospel cannot be changed. Its power is everlasting. We go to when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, crying out to the Father to allow, the cup to pass. If there be any other way, allow the cup to pass. And he ended up saying, nevertheless, let thy will be done. When the angel spoke in heaven and asked if there was anybody worthy of opening the scroll, his voice was heard above the heavens, in heaven, and beneath the earth, and nobody came forth. But my point is, it cannot be changed. It's fixed. It has eternal duration, longevity. So it merits the name everlasting, cannot be replaced. And the power that is inherent in it is everlasting because it came from God. Everything in it is eternal. Everything about the gospel is eternal. So if the angel is declaring, he is preaching the everlasting gospel. This is the same gospel that was preached by the apostles based on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that one must place their faith in to have the results, the effect, which is eternal life. That's the best I can do. That's the best I can do.
Okay. And Sister Kathy was next, and then Pastor Benson, and I'm coming this way. Go around like this. Sister Kathy.
So I was just going to say, when I think of the eternal gospel, it's, again, the gospel doesn't change. And it's like he's saying, fear God. He wasn't saying fear the Antichrist or Satan. He's saying fear God. And that eternal gospel is eternal. It's the word of God. He's preaching, he's urging these folks to turn to the gospel of Christ. That's how I see it. That it's not a different gospel. It's the gospel that we know, that saves.
The gospel that saves.
The gospel that saves. It's the good news.
Because it would seem, from what Paul is saying, just in Galatians, for example, there's only one gospel that saves, right?
Right.
And he's, again, writing to them, these Christians in this region of Galatia. Galatians is awesome. The whole Bible's awesome. But when you read that, I mean, Paul, he doesn't even do any of the pleasantries really, right, Pastor Benson, like he normally does. Man, he goes right for the jugular. He says, I am amazed at you people, right? What are you doing? I'm amazed that you're so quickly going off. You're going left. But let me stay on track. So, because there's only one gospel. That's his point, one that saves. Pastor Benson. And then coming back this way. Pastor Benson.
I'm going to come back to the last two words that Sister Kathy mentioned, good news.
Good news.
The gospel means good news. This is news that lasts forever, throughout eternity. So I can see why we call it the everlasting gospel. But it's also the gospel that preaches grace and not works. And so Paul was concerned that they were preaching another gospel concerning works, involving works.
Circumcision.
Circumcision, absolutely. And Sabbath worship and all that stuff.
So basically, to be saved, you got to kind of, to loosely say, you got to become a Jew, do the Jewish things,
Exactly.
plus believe in Jesus.
Exactly.
If you don't become a Jew, you can't get to Jesus.
You got to do all those things.
That's
you're
what they were.
talking about,
That's what they were being told.
which is works, and works don't save you. It's not works plus Jesus. No, it's just Jesus alone. So, here he's talking about this good news is eternal, for everlasting, and I guess that's all I want to say.
All right.
There was-
The good news is eternal. It never stops being good news. And the gospel that saves never stops saving, which is why it's good news. It's all based on the blood of Christ. Pastor Mike.
Ephesians chapter 3.
Ephesians 3.
Yeah, the mystery. And this, in my Bible, is a cross-reference to Revelation 6. Yes, Revelation 6, having the everlasting gospel. And I'm going to start at verse 8. Paul says, "To me, who am less than the least of all the saints, this grace was given that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to make all see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the ages has been hidden in God, who created all things through Jesus Christ, to the intent that now the manifold wisdom of God might be made known by the church to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places, according to the eternal purpose which he accomplished in Christ Jesus our Lord, in whom we have boldness and access with confidence through faith in him." So, from the beginning.
From the beginning. From the beginning of the ages.
Yeah.
And even if you say, okay, right, slain before the foundation of the world, so God already had this plan from the beginning when he created everything, right? This is what Pastor Mike just read for us, right? So I thank you. Ephesians 3, from the beginning of the ages, everlasting gospel. And Paul said the eternal purpose, right?
That's right.
So if somebody wants to, well, that only means it started at the beginning of something or when the earth was created. Okay, well, Paul said it was his eternal purpose. Okay, so for anybody that wants to, well, it's his eternal purpose. What does eternal mean?
Forever.
Eternal, forever. Everlasting,
Never ending.
never ending. God is not only never ending, he has no beginning, there is no end. He sees all what we call time for him First of all, he created that. He exists outside of it, and he sees past, present, future. I mean, he sees it all at the same time, which, if you can understand that, please explain it to me, right? God is eternal, everlasting. So this gospel, from the beginning of the ages, for his eternal purpose. So calling it an everlasting gospel, maybe, and I haven't looked up the word, but, and to search the whole Bible, but I don't believe, I shouldn't be going off the top of my head, so we can search this and try to test it, but I don't know that the gospel has ever been called everlasting, right, with that adjective in front of it. Yet, we just saw from what Pastor Michael read, for example, well, yes, it has. It just hasn't been labeled everlasting gospel.
Right.
But when you ask, well, what is it? Does the gospel have some limits? When did it start? When is it going to end? It doesn't. It's eternal. It is the everlasting gospel, because the good news, as Pastor Benson said, the good news, the substance of the gospel. Why is it good news? This is how we get our sins forgiven, right? And that purpose is God's eternal purpose that he purposed in Christ. This salvation that he provided. It was planned in, as we say, eternity past, which is just our way of trying to understand. Back before there was anything, God existed. He planned this out. And how long will it last? Forever. The life that you get, the eternal life, is what? It's eternal. So the life that comes as a result of believing the gospel is itself eternal, which again is why it's good news. Pastor Benson.
Just thinking, the passage that Pastor Michael read, throughout that whole book of Ephesians, it talks about, it was eternal, he talks about his eternal purpose.
Yeah.
The whole book of Ephesians. And one verse that I was thinking about was Ephesians 1:4, as he had, according as he have chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love. And he continues that. He sets the time frame. It was before the foundation of the world. And he talks about us by grace. To go along with what you were saying. So the book of Ephesians tells us.
He says it. So, which he accomplished in Christ. So this gospel is everlasting. So to say that the angel is proclaiming the everlasting gospel, yeah, the gospel is everlasting. But it doesn't mean, from the context, and looking at other passages like we just did, it's not saying that what the angel is proclaiming is some gospel we've never heard before, right, in Scripture. Or to be more specific, as Paul said in Galatians, a different gospel, which is not another of the same kind. As in, there's a different kind of good news that applies during the tribulation, and that's what this angel is going out proclaiming. The text doesn't say anything like that. Just simply calling the gospel everlasting is not implying or explicitly saying, oh, hey, this angel's got a different gospel, so listen up.
And in the New King James, the definite article, the, precedes everything. Everlasting, I'm sorry. So, you know, it's not a gospel, but it is the
gospel. Mm-hmm. Paul says, examine yourselves to make sure you're in the faith.
Right.
Which is kind of tricky.
Oh, here we go. We got to break
Yeah.
out some Greek and start reading Greek. But everlasting gospel, again, there's one gospel. There's one way to be saved, right? Let me throw one last verse in here that I thought of and pulled up. Galatians. Back to Galatians. Look at chapter 3. Galatians chapter 3, verse 8. As Paul is talking about how we're justified. Justified by faith. How are you declared legally righteous before God? It's by faith. And he says, well, I'll start at verse 6. Just as Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, therefore know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. And here it is. I want to point out verse 8. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel to Abraham beforehand, saying, in you all the nations shall be blessed. So when you read that, I don't know about you, but I got to read that like 3-4 times and chew on that. It says the gospel is preached to Abraham beforehand. And when it says beforehand, we go all the way back to Genesis. Before there was a nation, before he had any offspring. And what was he told? In you all the nations shall be blessed. And we know this is talking about the Abrahamic covenant. The covenant God made with Abraham. In your seed shall all the nations be blessed. So how, but this still makes my New Testament brain kind of go on blink a little bit. Say, well, wait a minute. What does it mean saying the gospel was preached beforehand to Abraham? Because I naturally want to say gospel, I start off with the name of Jesus. But we know nobody in the Old Testament knows Jesus by the name Jesus, right? So how can the gospel have been preached? And we're even given the content of what he was told, this good news that was declared to Abraham. The gospel as has been brought out. Gospel is the good news. When it says preached, it's declared. Evangelion, right? We talk about evangelism, declaring, preaching this good news. That's what evangelism is. This was evangelized to Abraham, and what was he told? In you all the nations shall be blessed. So Paul is saying this is the gospel, and it was given to Abraham when God told him, when he made this promise to Abraham. So how is that the gospel? I thought the gospel was you got to say death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ. How is that the gospel? Pastor Ron.
And also is in Matthew 4:23, it speaks of it says, and Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness, all kinds of disease among the people. And once again, it seems different in terminology. So that's what I'm seeing in the Old Testament when Abraham. It's the good news, but terminology may have been different. Yeah.
Yet the substance of this, Pastor Benson. Let me hold that thought. Pastor Benson.
We remember when Abraham and his son Isaac went up on the mountain when he was going to make the sacrifice.
Yes.
He made Isaac carry the wood on his back, and they went up, and then they started the fire. Had his son lay on the wood, and his son said, and I'm looking at Genesis chapter 22 and verse 7 and 8. He says, and Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire in the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt sacrifice? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a sacrifice, provide himself a lamb for a burnt sacrifice. So they went both of them together. And of course, when he got ready to slay his son, the Lord told him, not to slay his son, and he provided, there was a lamb in, I'm looking at verse 13. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. So we see that God said he would provide the lamb, and that's what he did. Now, we know that throughout the centuries, they were doing sacrifices, but there was never a sacrifice that could take away sin completely.
Or permanently, right?
Or permanently, until he sent his son. And so his son was the sacrifice. He's the only sacrifice. So the gospel was preached, if we go back and look at it.
So what God, oh, Pastor Michael, here we got a mic coming over to you.
Y'all gonna cut that out.
Get your exercise. So this might add some light in Romans chapter 3 to the beforehand aspect. Romans chapter 3, I'm going to start at 21. But now the righteousness of God apart from the law is revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ, to all and on all who believe, for there is no difference. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith, to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So, sins were there.
Right.
People have been sinning since the beginning, but God passed over them, looking forward to the redemption in Jesus Christ, when he would set him forth as the propitiation, as his substitute.
And as you also showed us from Ephesians, just this fact, well, we know Paul talks about the church itself being a mystery, right? Something that had not been revealed. Nobody in the Old Testament had any clue about it, right? So this salvation itself, how this all works, the mystery of godliness, right? Of who Jesus is, the Godhead, all of this is something God has been progressively revealing and building up to. Yeah. And even Abraham, I think Paul makes this point, right? We keep going in Romans, that Abraham, talk about justification, being declared legally righteous. Abraham was declared righteous before circumcision. So is there any Moses yet to get any tablets and give the 613, by most counts, pieces of the law? The law hasn't been given yet, right? There's no nation of Israel. That's what God is promising to Abraham. And even before Abraham was told, before God told Abraham to circumcise himself and his son, what? Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him. It was imputed to him for righteousness. Before there was any law, any of that. Paul makes that point too. So yeah, this is, again, and all of this good news. So are you seeing how is that good news to Abraham? Because all of this, we don't have to, at least this is what I learned from studying this in Revelation 14, talking about this everlasting gospel, because it did grab me to say, okay, well, I'm looking at what the angel is saying. The angel, at least what the quote that we have, the text doesn't mean the angel goes around and literally that's the only thing he ever says over and over and over again. It doesn't say that, but that's what we're given. So I can't go beyond that, right? But just because the angel doesn't say Jesus died on the cross for your sins, in this quote that we're given in Revelation 14, doesn't mean the angel is not proclaiming the gospel or that he's saying something else. This gospel, because what was Abraham told? In you, all the nations of the world shall be blessed. Well, isn't the gospel, isn't that good news? Because eventually Abraham is going to come to pass and be realized. Abraham's not going to see it necessarily, all of it. But eventually, by the time we get way down here on the timeline, oh, Gabriel shows up and says, you're going to name him Jesus. Why? Because he'll save his people from their sins. And Jesus, to go all the way back to the other end of the timeline, he's that seed of Abraham that was promised. He is of the line of Abraham, so all the nations are blessed and can be saved through this promised seed, Jesus, who is the Christ. So that's why this gospel, again, is everlasting, and why the scripture can say, oh, the gospel was preached to Abraham. Huh? Yeah. He was just told this piece of it, but in just saying, in you shall all the nations of the world shall be blessed. Isn't all of that in there? The death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ. First of all, that there is a Christ. There's no Messiah mentioned yet at that point. Like as we're reading the Bible, there's no, you go to Genesis, all they got is there's a curse. I always look at Noah. You know, when they name Noah, they say, oh, this one's going to comfort us because of the work of our hands. For me, I see they were thinking Noah is the Messiah. To them, the good news is reverse this curse. Why did the curse come? Because of sin. They're looking for somebody to reverse this curse because somebody's supposed to crush the head of the serpent and what the serpent has done. So Noah's born and they name him thinking he's the one who's going to comfort us. Well, he wasn't the one. Everybody's looking for Messiah until finally he did come. Pastor Mike.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pastor Ron.
Oh, Pastor Ron, how long have you had that mic? I'm sorry. Pastor Ron got the mic in his hand, and I'm talking. I'm sorry, Pastor Ron. You didn't forget what you had, did you?
God is patient.
Thank you. I'm going to be quiet and sit down. Go ahead.
No, I just want to interject that, throughout Scripture, the gospel in the Old Testament is revealed in types and shadows, pictures. For example, in the Garden of Eden, he clothed Adam and Eve. He slew the animal, and he clothed Adam and Eve. It's a picture of the gospel, kind of rudimentary picture. But then in Noah, the ark itself is a picture of the gospel, salvation.
Yes.
They went into the ark and he closed the door. He did it. And then also
anybody that was outside of that ark died.
Yeah. And then with Moses, when they're out in the wilderness, and they said, you want the cure? He said, look to the serpent. He held up the serpent. So it's a picture of the gospel, and throughout. And then the blood over the doorposts when they were being rescued out of Egypt. It's a picture. The Passover is a picture of the gospel. And then as we get to the New Testament, it's fully revealed in Jesus Christ in a person.
Yeah, revealed and fulfilled, right? Yeah, amen. Amen. Pastor Mike.
I was going to say that this discussion brings greater light on the belief that Abraham had. Yeah.
How so?
Because he didn't have the whole picture.
Yeah.
But yet he believed.
He believed. He believed.
He believed.
And those in the Old Testament, because the question comes up, well, how do people in the Old Testament get saved? Jesus isn't here yet. They don't even know. And you have to get to a point where this hope, this one who was promised in Genesis 3, verse 15, right? The one who's going to crush the head of the serpent. and that's all we have. It takes a while to get to where this has congealed around. There is a nation of Israel, right? A kingdom of priests, and there's a service for serving and worshiping God, and they have all this. They have the scriptures, and they had a job to do, right? They're supposed to be declaring, they're supposed to be showing the world who the one true and living God really is. And through the scriptures, now we can boil this down, especially in the book of Isaiah, for example, right? This one, he's called a servant. The servant suffers, but there's also this victorious servant. There's this one who's the king of Israel. There's all these different titles, and you know, we can kind of start to paint this picture of this one, and we call it, oh, this is the anointed of God, the Messiah, this one who is coming. But Abraham didn't have any of that. And all the people during the time of what we call the Old Testament, you know, as we call before Jesus was born, what did they have? Some had much more information than others, right? Especially when you get to right before Jesus is incarnate and is born, but still their faith, how do they get saved? Because Jesus isn't here yet. Same way Abraham did. Faith. It's faith. Remember the people that asked Jesus, what do we do to work the works of God? What can we do? And what did Jesus answer them? Believe on the one whom he has sent. And he told people, if you don't believe me, you don't believe in me, then you don't believe the Father. So nothing's changed. Believe God. If you believe God, you're going to believe Jesus. If you believe, not, you know, just some acknowledgement or intellectual, but like what it means to believe the gospel. If you believe God, you believe the gospel. That's faith. And we're saved through our faith. In the Old Testament, that's how Abraham was saved, by grace. And it's always been grace, right? Has anybody ever been able to earn? Did Abraham earn anything? Yeah, oh, he said it. By grace, through faith, not of works, right? Because why not? Why not works? Not that anybody should boast, right? No boastings. Or even the law of Moses, that law could not save. It was not designed to be the way that anybody would get saved or could get saved. The law was not given as a means of salvation. So this gospel, I believe we have established pretty authoritatively from the scriptures, right? There's only ever been one gospel, good news, but haven't we looked at a bunch of different ways, maybe not ways to say it, but like what's in this gospel? What is it? What is this good news? To Abraham, the good news was, in you, your seed, and you, all the nations are going to be blessed. He didn't get the whole picture, but it was good news, right? And as Pastor Mike said, he believed God. And now as we're talking about it, I'm thinking about it, man, that was, to me, just that little bit. But he believed God. So yeah, let me not try to say, man, I think I got more faith than Abraham, this and that. Look at what Abraham did. He went and lied and told Sarah to tell him you're my sister. Oh, Abraham's not such a big deal when it comes to faith. Oh, really? Don't boast, right? Just let's stay in our lane. Because what does the scripture say about Abraham? Abraham's called friend of God. So this gospel has not changed. It's called the everlasting gospel in our text here in Revelation 14, which is, as it turns out, just saying it a way that we're not used to. But we see the principle in Scripture, as we've read. And for example, we can use this as a key verse, Ephesians 3:8, right? It says, from the beginning of the ages. And it talks about God's eternal purpose. So the gospel, this good news, is everlasting. It is eternal, not only in terms of when it started, in terms of God coming up with the gospel, if you will, planning all of this out, but it also means what? That it has no end. Will your gospel, your ticket, your justification, when you die, you know, people talk about, are you going to show up at the pearly gates and St. Peter's going to be waiting there? We know that, is that biblical? Not at all, not one bit, right? But if you want to say, I got my ticket punched, I'm righteous, here's my record, my legal record, Jesus' righteousness is covering all of my sins. Does it run out? Does it expire? No. So, in that way, the gospel is everlasting as well, because we have eternal life through our faith in this everlasting gospel, because of God's grace. So, where does that put us next about this gospel? Because going back to Revelation 14, verse 6, this angel is flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel, to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. You know, I grew up, I just had this notion, and it was more than a notion. It seemed to be like, I don't know how much of it was my own assumption, or just like this is what I was taught over the years. I don't remember, but I had this notion that once the rapture happens, because I grew up, there is a rapture, and it's happening before the tribulation. And I still, now that I'm actually saved, I still believe the same thing. Now I can look in the scriptures and find that, right? But I had this idea that once the rapture happens, that's it. People can't be saved anymore, and nobody else is going to, like, the gospel isn't necessarily going out because you just took all the church away. So who's going to even preach? In that moment right after the rapture, there's nobody here for that moment who believes the gospel because Jesus just took the church away. So there's nobody left on the planet that believes the gospel, so how is the gospel going to get preached? Now, we've been studying Revelation, so we see how the gospel is going to get preached, but it is relevant here because in studying and, you know, preparing to teach through this part of chapter 14, I thought about that. I say, you know, yeah, I used to, I don't know where I got that from. I'm just assuming that. And, you know, sometimes I hear people will say that. People will even say, hey, we got to get out of here, Sister Sheila, we got to get saturate going because we got to get that last person into the kingdom. Have y'all ever heard anybody talk like that? You never know. That person you witness to might be the last person who's coming into the kingdom. You might be the one to witness to that last person, and they get saved, and then bam, the rapture is going to happen. Is that biblical? Well, no, right? For one, have we, as we've studied Revelation, and starting in chapter 6, where what I see and Pastor, and, you know, as we teach, Pastor and I have taught through Revelation, we started the wrath in chapter 6 when Jesus started opening the scroll, the seals of the scroll. So talking about the 7 years, we've been working our way through the 7-year tribulation period since then. Have we seen anybody get saved as we've worked our way through Revelation? And putting our timeline as we're working through Revelation, that we're working through, we said chapters 12 and 13, that gets us to the midpoint of the tribulation. Has anybody gotten saved during this tribulation period? Yeah, Pastor Benson said yes, Sister Sheila. Can we come up with just one quick example of the ground that we've covered so far? Because again, and in our doctrinal statement as a church, now this is not a salvation issue, right? But we believe and teach that, one, there is a rapture, which is separate from the second coming of Christ, and that timing-wise, that rapture will happen before the beginning of the tribulation period. So, have we seen anybody get saved as we've worked our way through Revelation? And we've said, yeah, somebody's gotten saved, because if we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, so we'd have to say the rapture has happened already with where we are in our study of Revelation. The rapture has happened, so the church has been taken out. Have we seen anybody get saved? Let's frame it this way. From chapter 6 onward, has anybody gotten saved? Pastor Benson, you say sure, and you're looking down. What do you see?
Yeah, I'm looking at, to give you the quick answer, Revelation chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. And one of the elders answered, Cecilia, you read it. Here, let her read it, because I'm going to stumble.
Read. So Pastor Benson pointed us to Revelation chapter 7, verse 14. Sister Sheila's going to read it.
Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. So he said to me, These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will dwell among them.
Clearly, these are saved people, right? These are not sinners in heaven wearing white robes. It says these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Later in Revelation, we see, in fact, it's in chapter 19, where we see the second coming of Christ, that these robes are the righteousness of the saints. Now again, what righteousness do we have before the throne of God? None of our own. It's the righteousness of Christ. In fact, here in chapter 7, it says they've washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. How do you wash your robe in blood, but it's white, right? So symbolic language is, again, this is talking about saved people. Saved, what? By grace, through faith, blood of the Lamb, not of yourselves, right? Again, here's that everlasting gospel, all of that. So this is a picture of that. Sister Lisa.
Revelations 13, it talks about saints that were on the earth. And it says it was granted that, it's verse 7.
Mm-hmm.
It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him. So I just read 7 just to indicate that there were saints.
Make war with the saints. Again, so saints, holy ones, right? Well, that's why a saint is not someone that the Pope or, and forgive me, I forget the mechanism that the Catholic Church does. I believe it's the Pope who declares someone a saint, right? Again, completely unbiblical and not correct. But a saint is not someone that the Catholic Church says, oh, they are now Saint so-and-so. Saint just means there's a Greek word, hagios, talking about holy. What does holy mean? When we say God is holy, what does that mean? He's set apart. He's set apart. Now, when we talk about the holiness of God, and a blood-washed, right, believer being holy, again, we're holy, we're set apart because of the blood of Christ, and that also gets into how we are to live, right? We're supposed to be set apart from non-believers, which, think about the parallel to Israel. Weren't they supposed to be the same way, right? A kingdom of priests. They were supposed to be, again, they were and are God's chosen people. And that's one of the things of what he chose them for. They were supposed to show him to the world, but they're supposed to be different from everybody else. So these saints, these holy ones, these set apart ones, these are saved people, Sister Lisa, as you're pointing out. So clearly, those are 2 examples. Yes, people can be and will be saved during the tribulation. And again, we believe there's a rapture and it will happen before the tribulation. So that means that notion that I had, like I said, I don't know where I got it from growing up. I just, until I start really studying the Word, had this notion that that we're going to go out and witness because you might be the one to witness to the last person who gets saved. Well, that's not correct. After the rapture and during the tribulation, there will be people who hear the gospel and get saved. And here in chapter 14, we see maybe one of the most dramatic ways that the gospel is preached during the tribulation, because now we have an angel preaching the gospel, this everlasting gospel that we've talked about, to everyone on the earth. Do you see? And I know people read Revelation, they say Revelation is scary, I don't like reading it, I don't want to read it. Remember, there's a blessing in reading this book. I'm encouraged when I read this, not because, oh, I love the reading about the plagues and all that. No, I mean, this is it's terrible to think about. Look at just the lake of fire. I don't like to think about. I have, most of us do. Don't you have people that you care about that aren't saved? I mean, do you actually believe this book? It says this lake of fire. Anyone who does not put their faith, who hasn't believed, anybody that doesn't believe this everlasting gospel will be in that lake of fire forever. That's what we're reading about. We're reading about the consummation, the end of the world, if you want to say it that way. That's what we're studying. God has revealed certain things about this, how it's going to go down. When I read this, I get encouraged by the fact that, I mean, even during this time period, which Jesus said is going to be the worst time that there ever has been on planet Earth and ever will be, and even at the point where we're at, we've hit the midpoint of the tribulation, right? The Antichrist is in power, ruling the world, has declared himself to be God, has a false prophet who his whole job as a prophet is pointing people to he's God. This person is able to do these lying wonders, for example, to call fire down on the earth in the middle of people, where people can see it, say whatever that looks like. Oh, look at that tree over there, and he just, call fire down, whatever that it looks like. And it's real. He calls down fire, and whatever it is going to get burnt up. He has powers. Satan is behind all of this. This is a time of deception, lies, and satanic activity everywhere. And the lines are drawn. Take this mark or die. Either you're going to, okay, I'm team Antichrist, he owns me, I worship him, or you're going to worship God. And remember, we read in chapter 13, the Antichrist will be allowed by God to make war with the saints and overcome them. So this is going to be a time I'm saved, I got saved during this tribulation, I'm for God, I will not worship the Antichrist. Well, not only is the world system against you, because if you don't have the mark, you can't buy or sell. We're getting hungry, we need things. What are we doing? Are we banding together? Are we trying to go underground? And in all the meantime, he's making war. So it's not a passive, well, you Christians do what you want to do and the rest of the world just does whatever. No, we're actively killing. And the Antichrist, every policy, every, whatever, it's actively going out, making war to kill anybody that doesn't have this mark. But God is still proclaiming, even at this point, this everlasting gospel, and he is now using an angel to do it. Now, we saw the 144,000. Remember, we looked at them in chapter 7 of Revelation, and right after them, John says, and after this, and I know, again, it's an interpretation, but I strongly believe it's correct that when he says after this, and he sees this multitude that no man could number, that's the result of, it would appear that these 144,000, one of the things they've been doing, because we've already worked our way through and looked at them, right? They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They are wholly dedicated to Jesus during this tribulation. One thing they do, they evangelize. We believe that that's what they do, and we see the results of it in chapter 7. Now, God is, so he's been using people, he always has, to proclaim, right? proclaim this gospel. Again, this good news, which is everlasting. Now he's using an angel to do it. Is anybody going to stop this angel? I mean, you can kill people, right? Hunt them down, kill them, make the Bible illegal, have Bible burnings, whatever else, I don't know, whatever else that looks like. The Antichrist making war with the saints. Is anybody going to stop this angel from proclaiming this gospel? Yeah, can anybody stop the angel? What does the text say? Who is the angel proclaiming this gospel to? Every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. Now, is this just God? Is this just some hyperbole, just meaning, yeah, the angel's going to fly around and proclaim the gospel, quote unquote, all over the place? I believe this is I don't want to call it, not a figure of speech. What I'm saying is, what does it mean? He's going, there is not going to be anybody who doesn't hear the gospel. Every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. And we've seen that phrase before in Revelation. The point is exactly what it says. Everybody. There's not going to be a people group. Because again, you know, people want to say, well, what about, I don't know why we like to use Africa. Right. Why do we, what about, and that's so outdated, right? Man, everybody in Africa got a cell phone. What you talking about? But people want to say, what if you go to the darkest reaches of unreached Africa? I think it'd be more like some islands in the South Pacific, more likely, right? Wherever people want to say, oh, you go there and nobody's ever set foot there. I mean, we know there are people there, but nobody, because it's treacherous to get there and this, that, and the third, and we're pretty sure the gospel's never reached there. This angel is going to proclaim this gospel to everyone who dwells on the earth. Even North Korea. North Korea, will a drone shoot this angel down? No. Everyone. And Jesus, and I'm going to end with this, go to Matthew chapter 24, where we've gone many times. I believe Jesus talked about this. Matthew chapter 24, verse 9. I'll start there. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. The gospel will reach the entire world during this tribulation period. Because if nothing else, this angel, clearly, obviously, sent by God, that is his mission, is to proclaim this gospel to everyone on the entire earth. And again, that encourages me that God, what did Peter say? Talking about God's long suffering, not willing that any should perish. Even in this, there's still a chance. Somebody out there that hasn't taken that mark yet. Again, we don't know what it's going to look like. If they set up, go to the MVA, renew your license, and go get your mark. I don't know. But somebody that hasn't done it yet, that angel, can hear this gospel proclaimed from the air by an angel and believe and be saved. And Brother Donnell, you had your hand up, and then Deacon Charles. We got 3 minutes.
Like you said, you heard that we're waiting for the last Gentile to be saved and then the rapture take place. And then I hear at the same time in the scriptures it says that waiting for the fullness of the Gentiles to come in. Is that in the tribulation or is that before the tribulation? the
Yeah,
fullness
see-
of the Gentiles come in, and then Israel will be saved.
See, so that takes us back to Romans. Because we got 2 minutes, I want to do better. Can I put that in my bucket of, I'm going to put it on the parking lot up here? Because that will require me to pull a couple of passages out. I don't want to open it up and start trying to rush and blah, blah. We're going to come back to that. We're going to come, that's a really good question. Gets into timing. Now, and just to clarify, what I heard growing up, they never got specific about you might be witnessing to the last Gentile that's coming in. It was just, hey, witness because you might be the one who witnesses to that last person who's going to get saved. Because again, what I was taught / heard / came to kind of loosely believe was, oh, when the rapture happens and the church is taken out, nobody else gets saved after that. That was specifically what I always heard. And again, as we've studied Revelation, that's completely incorrect. People can and will get saved during the tribulation period. So that, I don't know if I can call it a popular saying or just kind of pop culture Christianity, that's incorrect. That the rapture is the end and nobody can get saved after that. So that's what I was taught. But that's an excellent question, Brother Donnell. I am going to get to that. Deacon Charles, you had something? I'll give you the last. Oh, all right. Any last, quick, we got less than a minute. A thought, a scripture, anything, an exhortation. Pastor Benson. So next week we're going to start with that, next Sunday, Lord willing. His question was, do I find it unique or strange that an angel who is not redeemed is preaching the gospel? That God is using, because an angel who has no part in redemption, right? Angels don't get redeemed. They can't be. So one of the elect angels is preaching the gospel. I have some thoughts on that. I'll start with that because that's where we're going to pick up is finish looking at this angel proclaiming the gospel and the aspects of this everlasting gospel. Because I want to also talk about why does it seem so negative? Shouldn't it just be the good, happy stuff? Look at what he's saying to people. That's where we'll pick up next week, Lord willing. Father, we thank you. Thank you for your everlasting gospel. Thank you for, again, just your long-suffering nature and the fact that you came up with all of this before you created anything. You could have, knowing everything that would happen and the rebellion that would come, you could have let us just be with Satan and his angels in the lake of fire forever. But instead, you provided a means of salvation for human beings just by your grace. And you didn't have to, and we just thank you for what you've made available through your Son, Jesus Christ. And I just pray again for all those who are unsaved that might hear this, Lord, that you would just use our time today to convict sinners. And I just pray that it would also have been edifying to the saints. And we thank you for your word and for your word that doesn't change, never has changed and never will change. It is everlasting. Your word is established forever. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.